We were supposed to introduce Roberto Maciero. Our dear friend Roberto Maciero, we'd love to introduce him. DJ, can you put some music? And we're going to have Roberto Maciero, who is the organizer of this panel, and he's going to invite his esteemed guests to go on stage, and we're going to have some interesting discussions, right, Roberto? Yes. We look forward. Roberto's with the Renaissance Evolution. Give him a round of applause.
Yeah. Early in the morning.
I'm so excited to be here. Listen my language, my natural language, and the Italian bring me to my original country. I come from Italy, of course, grew up, was born in Venice, grew up in Milan, and now, through my lifetime, I worked on projects with some of the most accomplished leaders. And as we all know, it's all about connecting. I think this event, and this is my second time on the road, that I have the honor to be invited, and is the epicenter of many opportunities. And these opportunities are created by people like Vice Mayor Olnes and Paula, and the former, the mayor of Fort Lauderdale in this beautiful, wonderful city. Renaissance Evolution is a non-profit cultural and economic development think tank based in Washington, D.C. We create a positively disruptive methodology that facilitates the interaction of people, markets, academic institutions, governments, and businesses, both locally and around the globe. A methodology that is rooted on the application of 8 key pillars: transparency and ethics, sustainability, culture and education, health, well-being and happiness, trade and economic opportunity, foreign policy, diplomacy and peace building, and business for good. It is our philosophy that overlaying culture, language, and diversity with business plans, P&L decisions, and overall corporate culture provide an essential tool for success on the new economy. The creation of the Chief Cultural Officer is the next logical step in the evolution of global business. And in this panel session, executive and global influencers will discuss its role, place, and needed presence in the world stage. Thank you.
Evolution. Understanding the art of human connectivity. Relationship building. The epicenter of opportunity. Renaissance Evolution offers the insights, perspective, and new formula for the sustainable collective growth of global markets. Through its understanding of the intricacies of human interaction, foresight into future trends, and network of global influencers. The Renaissance Evolution Academy presents a new executive curriculum and C-suite position. The Chief Cultural Officer. It's all about connecting. The culture of knowing what's next. Disrupting one another. Bringing people together to help each other. Seeing the impossible as possible. Creating greatness together. The Chief Cultural Officer. Shaping the evolution of the global economy.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So great to see everyone here. We're excited about this conversation. It's going to be a phenomenal one, and I think we have some incredible panelists. But before I introduce them to you and speak a little bit about who they are and what they do, I wanted to share something that I found that is very meaningful to me, and I think probably meaningful to all of us. It comes from the great Gandhi, who was the liberator of India. He said, "A nation's culture resides in the hearts and in the soul of its people. So we're about to talk about right now, I believe it's very much at the core of our humanity, and it brings us all together, regardless of tradition or where we come from. And I want to say that I think the reason they got a priest to be the moderator of this panel is because they wanted to make sure none of them get in a fight with each other after coming and break them. But they're actually all very peaceful, good guys. Let me introduce to you Mr. Daniel Garza. Daniel is the president of the Libre Initiative, and he's a former associate director at the Office of Public Liaison at the White House. Welcome, Daniel. Mr. John Dixon is the president of the World Trade and Development Group. Welcome, John. Colonel Noel Samot is a recognized United States Force colonel, Air Force officer, but he is also very, very involved in his own business and his own work, and so we also welcome Noel to come to this panel. Welcome, Noel. Art Estopinan, another wonderful president of the Estopinan group, but I must say also someone I've known for a long time, involved heavily in the world of politics and culture, and we're so happy to have you, Art. Welcome. All recognizable, wonderful people to start this conversation, and let me just say that we have some questions for them, but we also have, as we begin, these pillars that Roberto spoke to us about, that I want us to have in our mind as we speak, because the key pillars of this chief cultural officer position are transparency and ethics, sustainability, culture and education, health, well-being and happiness, trade and economic opportunity, foreign policy, business for good, and diplomacy and peace building. So let's keep that in the forefront as we begin this conversation. And I know that most of you have a microphone next to you. Art, I think this one's going to be yours. Is this one on for Art? It says locked on it, but I just want to make sure that it's on, just in case he needs it. Daniel, I'm going to start with you. And I'm going to ask this question of all of our panelists and give them time to kind of go back and forth and kind of moderate really the time that they have, because obviously we have a lot to deal with in a short time. But what does the concept of Chief Cultural Officer mean to you, and how do you feel it fits into the new global economy?
I think very simply it's about the exemplary actions, the model behavior that you're seeking for within your workforce, also the expectations of carrying out either the vision, donor intent. In my case, because I run a nonprofit organization, we don't actually provide a product, but more of a service in the sense that we advocate for policies, we impact the Latino electorate across the country through our messaging and our policies, but also because of the community work that we do. And in doing so, a culture is going to develop in your organization. Now, we launched in June of 2011, and you can help steer your workforce in the kind of culture that you want to develop. And so a cultural officer in that sense is very important in making sure that they are setting the direction, that they're setting the tone, that you're incentivizing those employees to work towards that vision that you have, that kind of culture that you want to develop, that you reward them as well, and that there's going to be some consequences when they're not operating within that framework, within that discussion. So to me, it's very simple. It's setting up, I think, model behavior, model actions and conduct, and the expectations that you have on your workforce.
Very good. John?
The idea of a chief cultural officer is one that's been floating around already for a while. I think that business and culture are inseparable in the first place, and I want to congratulate Vice Mayor Holness for this program and the amazing success that it represents. The title of the program being the Florida International Trade and Cultural Expo. So you've already put them together, and here you have business people, we have academics, we have the artists, and every aspect represented there. So I've noticed, I was just at the UN General Assembly 2 weeks ago, and there was a fascinating discussion led by the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation and the Commission on International Religious Freedom. And it's interesting, today we're at this business forum and also being moderated by a priest, and that is further evidence that this is already happening. But people were talking about allowing employees to come to their company as a whole person and even bringing their faith and expressing their faith. And so this is happening with American Express was there, and very many international participants as well. And then later a week later, I went to a fundraiser for the Pearl S. Buck Foundation, and that's the woman that wrote The Good Earth and has started a foundation for helping orphan children and young children from around the world. And she, the foundation she created made an initiative called the Workplace, a Welcome Workplace, recognizing that these cultural questions are absolutely critical in the business world. So the banks, the local banks, were there talking about the initiatives they were doing. So that's already happening, and I explained to people how excited I was because I'd be coming to this and we're talking about the Chief Cultural Officer. And she said, well, that's mostly handled by HR department and it's kind of invisible in the company, but it is being recognized now. Creating a position of Chief Cultural Officer is lifting that position and that awareness up in the workplace and in the community. So that here it's happening automatically in front of us, but this brings attention to the absolute importance and significance of this cultural awareness in business.
Thank you, John. I wanted to say Noel is an Air Force colonel. I wanted to get that right. An ethical entrepreneur and the president of the Atabe Group. Noel.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Alberto, and thank you, Vice Mayor, for the opportunity here. Two things for context. I served my country for 25 years, flew a strike, went into business, started a couple of companies, and my last job before this was to serve as the sole economic development person on the oversight board for Puerto Rico. So I've seen the impact of ethical investment in long-term economic growth. I'll leave you with two things. Number one, we have a saying in the business world that culture eats strategy for lunch. You can develop all the strategy you want, you can develop all the processes that you want, but if you don't have the right culture in your organization, you're going to get nowhere. Number two, for long-term economic sustainable growth, you need ethics and transparency. So if you are actually going to better the lives of millions, you cannot do it with a short-term viewpoint. You have to have a very long-term viewpoint, and the only way to guarantee long-term success is if rules are more important than the desires of the few. And the only way to do that is through transparency and ethics. So back to your question, Father, it is incredibly important that companies and organizations adopt a culture of ethical transparency if we are really going to be in a position to create economic and public benefit at scale. So this is not just an idea that may be in fashion or whose time may or may not have come. I believe it is absolutely imperative if we are going to have a serious discussion about long-term sustainable economic development that benefits the world.
Thank you, Noel. Art.
Thank you, Father. So as my colleagues have said, this is a brilliant idea, and I'd like to thank Roberto and Jose for inviting me here today to be part of this panel with my distinguished colleagues. After working in the U.S. Congress for 27 years, being Chief of Staff to the former Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and been very involved in international issues my whole life, this concept of the Chief Cultural Officer is extremely, it's a brilliant idea, and it's extremely important. Because I remember when I was in government, I used to have time and time again American senior executives coming to us, and they're like, you know, we're initiating a company or a project in this foreign country, and they don't understand, and we don't understand their ways and their culture, etc. So elevating a chief cultural officer to work directly, perhaps with the CEO, CIO, and making them part of the key decision makers is extremely important. And it's an issue that in an increasingly global economy, it's so important. And I'm so happy to be part of this. And hopefully I can contribute and somehow to make sure that this becomes more of the rule rather than the exception.
Excellent, thank you, Art. So we've all seen the list of pillars, and we have an idea of what we're looking at here. And I know that all of you have extensive experiences we've already been able to see in everything that has come out in your first comments. I want you to choose one of those pillars, and tell us something that you remember from your work, your experience, or something you're experiencing right now in what you're doing, that you could somehow connect with our reality. As I was listening to Noel specifically, I was thinking of our young people today. You know, we call them a lot of things. We call them millennials. We have a lot of names for them. But one of the things that I see happening more and more is that they are really calling us more and more out to transparency. And not just the government. They want to see it everywhere. And we see that. You know, in spite of, I mean, we have so much communication, so much information, it seems to be that they're more concerned about getting the truth now, you know, the immediacy of it. And so that's a challenge for many of our governments and our systems that are used to going through processes to get to where they need to get, right? What would you say of these pillars? What speaks to you the most right now in what you see happening in the world around us? And maybe from your own experience, you can share something?
Yeah, so for ourselves, well-being would probably be the one that I think most applies for us in that list that we were rallying up. At the Libre Institute, we're part of the Stand Together network. And one of the main benefactors to Stand Together is Charles Koch. Charles Koch likes to say, we'll work with anyone to do good and with nobody to do bad. And what he strives for is a society of mutual benefit. And that vision, that well-being vision of being successful by serving others, whether in corporations or at a nonprofit, also applies to an organization like ours. Now, we started off almost like strictly, honestly, as an advocacy organization. Less taxes, less regulations, more free markets, economic freedom, these kind of things that would be considered center-right, if I'm being honest. But in applying this culture and driving this cultural model, our staff understood real quick that when we were engaging Latinos on these issues, we realized quickly that they were facing obstacles, barriers, disproportionately than other Americans. And what I mean by that is, there's 60 million Latinos, 30% of us only speak Spanish. That's a major barrier to success, to opportunity. In some states, 50% of us don't have a driver's license. That's a high number. It's something I think all of us in this room take for granted, a driver's license.
What percentage did you say?
It's 30%. Or I'm sorry, almost 50% in some states for driver's license.
Wow.
Yeah, it's less in other states, but when you're talking about these kind of obstacles, that matters. 33% of Latino adults do not have a high school diploma. So we said, wait a minute. If these folks can't access the free market, what good is the free market to them? If they don't have equal opportunity, why are we making false promises of having equal opportunity when they're facing these barriers? They're not getting a square deal in America. And so what we did was actually start to allocate our resources through this cultural model and help people to get their driver's license. In Las Vegas, for example, I'll be really quick. We talked to a flea market owner who had this amazing space that he was not using. And he says, and we teamed up with Fox Latino from Las Vegas, and we said, let us use this space and we'll bring you customers. And so we worked with Fox Latino to advertise that we were going to be holding expert training on driver's license. 90% of Latinos in Las Vegas were not passing the first time their driver's license exam. So we gave them this expert training. 500 Latinos showed up in our first session, and 500 after that, and 500 after that. Today, thousands have gone through this training, and our success rate is now up to 80% of the first time of the folks that go through this test, and then almost 100% when they do it again. So this actually has changed lives. Yes. English courses, financial literacy, citizenship, GED training. We're providing all these to thousands and thousands of Latinos. And now guess what? Because of this cultural model, we are finding that the free market has opened up to these folks. And they become champions of the free market because now they have opportunity that they didn't have before. And I think it had a lot to do with just, opening up yourself to a little bit and seeing beyond just what you want and what the community needs as well. So well-being, I think, is very critical.
Thank you, Daniel. I was going to throw something in our... Go ahead, Art.
I would like to say that when Jose invited me to participate, I told him, well, I just started doing that. With my own consulting group, I have an Asian partners because I need someone that knows the cultural sensitivities of those countries. So we just started the Asia Partners at the Estopinan Group, and I want to do it with Africa, and I want to do it with Latin America as well. I have colleagues in Japan and South Korea, and an American that speaks Japanese, Korean, and Mandarin. So that sort of cultural sensitivity is key, I believe, for my success with my company, because I'm going to learn about what they're interested in and how to go about doing business in those countries. So for practical purposes, I am implementing what we're discussing here now. So that is a great, great example, I believe, of what needs to be done. And I think what more and more companies and firms are going to realize.
Definitely. And one of the follow-ups I wanted to offer here is it's key to foreign policy for any nation today to have that cultural sensitivity. Because sometimes I think we impose our value system, our traditions, our sense of understanding reality on others without realizing they're not getting it, so there's no connection, right? So one of the pillars is foreign policy and diplomacy and peace building. I don't know if there's something that maybe Noel or John would like to speak to about that.
So, I wanted to just go back to the first pillar that you talked about ethics and transparency. Okay. In July of this year, Puerto Rico lived through exactly that challenge. As many of you know, there was widespread protests that actually caused the resignation, drove the resignation of the then governor, Ricardo Rosselló, to step down. And it's very interesting to look at that historic event in the context of culture. You were talking about a new generation that essentially realized that they were being left out of the economic development of the island because they were not part of this infamous Telegram Gate group that was making fun of the entire political machinery and actually the people of Puerto Rico. But I think deeper than that, you talk about culture, about this cultural awareness. I think there was a new generation that was embarrassed that they would be essentially associated with that type of activity. And we are seeing a new generation that is hungry for transparency, is hungry for justice and fairness, and that translates directly into holding those values very, very high in any organization. And that's why I like the fact that ethics and transparency is the first pillar among many, and the chief cultural officer, because I think it is the necessary condition for any transformation.
John?
Yes, I came into the business world very much by accident. I was in Okinawa, vice president of the American University Extension there, and realized we were doing international training for these young people, young Okinawans, and there were no jobs for Okinawans in Okinawa, I mean, international jobs for Okinawans in Okinawa. So I had a good friend that had created the World Trade Center in Portland, Oregon, and I thought, well, this was an independent trading kingdom for centuries, and perhaps through regaining this cultural background and foundation, through the World Trade Center, we could bring the dignity back to the people of Okinawa. So that's how we got started in the, I became aware of the international business, the power of the international business community. and especially through the cultural awareness and cultural explanation of a place. Then I was in Okinawa when 9/11 happened, and my necktie, by the way, I bought in the basement of the Twin Towers. Just to tell you how old it is, but I only wear it for very special occasions. So today I felt it was very special. And the Twin Towers came down. The Twin Towers was the headquarters of the network of World Trade Centers. There's 6 in Florida, there are 50 in the United States, 40 now in China. They're all over the world. And I was pretty shocked. In Okinawa, I couldn't call back to the headquarters. There was no phone, no email, no idea what happened. 2 floors in the Twin Towers were the headquarters. And I was at that same time that week teaching a training course for the Jieitai, the military officers of the Japanese self-defense forces. And they were coming up to me every day, how are you going to retaliate? What's America going to do? How are you? And I had no idea what, I mean, the TVs were blaring and I had these 2 big monitors there, and I'd have to go out into the hallway and just weep. I didn't know what to do. And then an inspiration finally came that we should make a World Trade Center in Afghanistan. It's because of the isolation that made them dangerous. And if we could establish a trade center, there'd be automatic instant connection with 300 other trade centers in 100 countries. So that project did happen. We're kind of under reorganization right now in Afghanistan, and that's a very challenging place to do business. But business is the only sustainable, it's another one of the pillars, sustainability, peace-building models. Every other effort for peace or for economic development, whatever, it's only lasts as long as it's sustainable, as long as the support is there, the government support. So business, what makes something sustainable is something that generates revenue, and only business generates revenue. So sustainability is definitely dependent on business. Sustainability and peace are business is the best model, the best vehicle to see those come about.
Thank you, John. You know, I want to say that we talk a lot about diversity, right? In most businesses. Have you noticed that? There's an increase in the importance of diversity, having diversity officers in almost every major organization has one, or a few, or a staff. And I always wonder, how do we get there? Because I think that there's a deep connection. As I was listening to Dean, I was thinking of Nova and all the other universities. Culture and education are intimately tied to each other. And how do you educate someone for this kind of position unless you've got the academic system to do it? And so one of the things that I wanted to say is that my first day in television, I went into 22 countries in Latin America. So there's this Cuban-American kid from Miami, right? Born in Puerto Rico, raised in Miami, conceived in Spain, it's all true. And then all of a sudden, I have to speak to 22 different countries in a language that they understand. And people think you speak Spanish, you speak Spanish. Well, yeah, you speak Spanish, but there's 21 versions of it throughout Latin America, in the sense that we don't all say the same things, right? And there's some words that I would say in Miami that I can't say in Puerto Rico, because in Puerto Rico they're a bad word. There's a lot of things that I would say in Miami that I can't say in Mexico, and that was the majority of my audience. And so I became aware that it's not just enough to be culturally sensitive to diversity. You must be educated for diversity. You must be educated for this. So I greatly appreciate the presence of educators here, because I think the future lies in that kind of education where, we can't just talk about diversity, we got to do the work of diversity and the work of culture. And that leads me to this next thing, and maybe Daniela, you can start us up on this. It's the actual meat and potatoes of it. How crucial do you think the art of human and cultural connectivity in global business and interpersonal relations is?
Yeah, it's massive, it's huge, and I can talk to you from an organizational level, a nonprofit. If we talked about sustainability and revenue, Revenue, you're only going to achieve it as profit if you offer a product or a service that makes life better for people. If there's demand for that product, because it improves their lives. That's why they're giving you their money, because you're giving them a product or a service that makes their life better. And very similar to a nonprofit organization is if we're going to be driving ideas, because that's what I sell is ideas, policy solutions, is to make their life better. And people even vote to decide whether this person or that person will make my life better. Which one is going to do it best? And that's how they vote. So, to get back to your point, I wanted to preface by saying that because when we were launching our organization back in June of 2011, it was going to be national. I knew that already. We're already in 10 states. We have about 70 employees. We're partnered with Americans for Prosperity, which have 500 employees and about 3.5 million volunteers. So we have a lot of folks. Now, here's the thing. I wasn't going to hire all Mexicans because, you know, even though we're doing outreach to the Latino community and we're 60% of the Latino population, I also understand, getting to the diversity of our community, is that women have different priorities maybe than men. Youth, the millennials, have different priorities maybe than adults. Faith organizations or people of faith have different priorities. Business owners have different priorities. In the Latino world, it's no different. I mean, you're talking about age, gender, economic status, educational status. Everything matters, and everything filters the way they receive information and what they think about the priorities that are impacting their lives. So, for me to be, to connect with the Cuban community in Miami, I hired a Cuban. And to connect with Colombianos, a Colombian. With women, a woman. Diversity is also, the messenger is also as important as the message sometimes. Why? Because they can relate to them in a very real way. They've experienced the same things that they have, and maybe even the priority issues are the same. And so they speak to them on their priorities, on their cultural experiences, and their American experience as well, in order to connect. Because it is about connecting. Now, of course, there's universal messaging. We use our social media platforms. We have over 1 million followers on Facebook and a ton on Twitter and all these other things, and so we have a sort of a universal type of messaging. I'm the president and the chief spokesperson for the organization. But there's no question that at the very local level, that connectivity is made much more effective to the messengers that we hire because of the diversity that is able to connect in a more efficient, effective way. No?
I'm smiling because you asked a question and I just remember the story that's one of my favorite stories of my career. My last job in the military was being the commander at Air Force's test pilot school, which is the best job on the planet. It's a combination of running your own fighter squadron, being a dean of a graduate school, and owning your own monster garage. You can fly an airplane you want. It's pretty fun. And we had our holiday party. And I remember that one of the young men in our unit was a little myth that we still call it holiday party instead of Christmas party. And I had this great speech planned, and as people started walking in, I realized I need to come up with a better speech. And the speech, I won't go into all the details, but it was basically the reason why we're having a holiday party is because in this gathering we have a guy who is Buddhist, a guy who is Hindu, several people who are Jewish, many of our gals are Catholic, and a bunch of Protestant Christians. And I could see people looking around the room going, I had no idea, like trying to figure out who's the Buddhist guy, But it was, and the whole point of the speech, which I wrote on a napkin in 2 minutes because I was so inspired by realizing that, was that is what made us better. And we, many people will think, oh, you're the military, you guys all look alike. I will guarantee you that if you went to that unit, you would be surprised at how many nationalities, how many women were there, how many folks from all sorts of countries, some allied partners that contributed. And I distinctly remember this one guy coming back to me afterwards, and he goes, I had no idea. And I am so proud of now realizing, he was almost embarrassed. I had no idea that is what made us so special. And it was a very moving moment because these people worked so well together because they respected each other. It was almost like this cultural diversity was on a second plane, And nobody realized that that was actually the source of a very deep strength and a deep capability that we had. And I remember that as being an inflection point in my tenure there, where folks started looking at each other with a little bit more curiosity and respect, and really trying to understand what everybody else brought. The moral of the story, if you want to have a really high-performing organization, you want to get about as many different minds as you can in that room, and culture makes you think in different ways. That is a competitive advantage that you just can't live without.
And to jump up what the Colonel said, I think that education is key for this component of cultural sensitivity. But as the Colonel said, there's some basic intrinsic elements that you need to possess inside that should come naturally, such as respect, such as being generally sensitive and appreciate the differences with other cultures. Those you cannot learn in education, but education is definitely a starting ground. But respect, being sincere, so on and so forth, those are key elements in order to move forward with the integration of the cultural sensitivity.
And on the point of connectivity, everybody just high-five one another. We can't see you from up here, but the person next to you, just give them a high five. We got to connect. We can connect right here. Thank you. And because you are really the program. What's going on here at FITSI is really remarkable, and there's like every culture represented. The whole world is here. And a great model, by the way, is Guyana. I think half of the city of Georgetown is here in Fort Lauderdale right now. It seems like a huge exhibit over there. And please go visit. One lady's making trash to art is her vision. And what a better metaphor could you find for what the work we're talking about today and what we're doing. But take the time here to connect. Another thing about Guyana is really interesting. I found that doing business with Guyana is challenging because, you know, in America, we'll let the Christians do Christmas and have the Jewish people do the Passover and the holidays, and then the Muslims can have Eid Mubarak, and we'll celebrate that way. But in Guyana, there are 6 very robust religious traditions, and everybody celebrates all of the holidays. They not to separate them out. So it's, I think, the most engaged interfaith community on earth, and I'm just learning about that recently. It makes it challenging there, but it's also very, very exciting.
I think that's great. One of the things, we have a few more minutes, so I would like us to begin to wrap up. But one of the things I want to give you an opportunity to speak about is to speak to one of the pillars that means something special to you. I think, you know, John, you brought up a little bit of sustainability right now because, you know, art, you know, trash to art or vice versa. I think that's one of the things we're not too accustomed to. We talk about being green, but we're not doing that yet. We still throw a lot out. This is a society of waste. But are there any of these pillars that really call out to you something that you would like to share? We just have like 1 or 2 minutes for each. Art?
Well, the foreign policy is what I would highlight. I believe that, you know, it really encapsulates what we have been talking about here: respect and being mindful of each of us, and incorporating that cultural sensitivity into the business world, in the global economy makes sense.
Yes.
I would, my current job is to catalyze investment in emerging markets, ensuring that it's done in an ethical and sustainable manner. And those are 2 of the main pillars in this Chief Cultural Officer concept. I really believe that if we are truly honest about sharing the benefits of inspired ethical trade with the world, you really need to have transparency and sustainability as core pillars in any endeavor you have. Otherwise, we're just repeating the sins of the past. And the world is becoming a very small, interconnected place, and the success of our neighbor is our success. So really, for your sake, for the sake of your family, your children, your grandchildren, generations to come, and the well-being of everybody else in the only planet that we know of that we live in, we really need to have a much broader, insightful, enlightened approach to investment, and I think the pillars that we have addressed are very positive first step towards that. John?
So, in overview, I think all those pillars are very important, and just back to the Chief Cultural Officer, I was thinking of every year in August our family gets together in a small town in Pennsylvania where my parents come from, and I have a cousin who joined the military before he finished high school and never did go back to finish. And I was talking to him last year, and I told him I was working on this project in Korea with the North Korea issue, and he said, "Oh, I've been to Korea many times." And I said, "Well, what was that about?" And he had grown up through he had gotten a job in a pharmaceutical company and worked really from the bottom up and never did get back for education. But he said they had opened they had a subsidiary, bought a plant in Korea, he said, and they kept sending managers over there, and then the people would come back and be so angry and so upset, and he said there was this guy, Mr. Kim, over there that was just chewing up everybody they'd send over. So he said, so they just ran out of people willing to go, and I was just, oh, I've never been there. I'd like to see, well, they all go see Mr. Kim. So he said, but I won. He said, I totally, I got the victory, and I became very famous in the company. I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I did a little research, and I walked over there, and I walked into the plant, and there was Mr. Kim with a scowl on his face, and he said, I just looked him right in the eye. I took his hand and shook his hand, and I said, "Annyeong ha shimnika," which means "How are you?" in Korean. He said when he said that, Mr. Kim's face just broke, and the big smile came out. He said, "Oh, come!" He brought him to his family that evening, and built the whole foundation of a huge success of that company. But my cousin had no education, but because of business, there's no way to do business without cultural competency and without understanding. You have to build trust. Without trust, there's nothing else. And so there is no way around the absolutely mandatory awareness of a cultural officer is just a great way to point that out and make companies and the broader society aware of the significance of it. But it's unavoidable with business. You can't do business without that.
Trade and economic opportunity. Trade, because I think it speaks to our interdependence between the countries. And when there's trade, there's trust, there's familiarity. And I think it creates bonds. And so war is lessened, or the possibility of war between countries that trade, people that know each other and are familiar with each other. So I love trade. Economic opportunity, because let's just be frank. Without the sufficiency or the accumulation of capital, it's difficult to advance the kind of pursuits or your aims, to advance charitable work, ministerial work, peace work. Resources means a lot. And so when there's economic opportunity, there's also independence of the individual. Look, I don't want to depend on politicians. I really don't. There's a role for government, but I don't want to depend on government either. And the only way you can do that is by being economically independent as individuals and as groups. And so I believe in trade and economic opportunity.
Excellent. Well, effective communication is a big part of all of this. And I think we've had 4 excellent, very effective communicators up here on this stage today. So let's thank them for their participation.